Okay, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and this one is going to be with winz, a French player who has played in many different games, as you will discover in this interview, but I'm sure most people will know him most recently from playing in Overwatch, where he was playing with Rogue, best French team and one of the best Western teams, and that's definitely not where we're going to start the interview, because we have to go back in time. What for me it wasn't that long ago, because I've been around esports for a long time. But if I say we're going back to like 2005, that's a long time for most people. A lot of people are like, was there esports back then? So when I first became aware of you was when you were playing Unreal Tournament, and you were playing when they brought out Unreal Tournament 2004, which was actually the sequel to the game. And I didn't really know you before this, but obviously you had this miraculous run where you won ESWC. Were you actually someone where your background is from Unreal? Were you a Quake player before that? Because I know you were in Quake afterwards. How did you get into esports, the competitive side?
Well, basically, I did start on Quake 3 in 1999 on the demo, actually. Okay. So I'm originally a Quake player. I only switched to Unreal Tournament 2004, in 2004 when it came out. And I think my first LAN was probably in 2001 or 2. Something like that, but it's been a while, yes. Okay.
So at this tournament, as I said, it was considered like miraculous, basically, because the problem is Unreal had its own very big scene in the context of esports at the time, obviously, in Unreal 99, the first version of the game. And there were many good players from that who, when Unreal Tournament 2004, technically like 2003 first, I think it was the original one. When the sequels came out, they all sort of thought, right, now it's Unreal's time for esports, like all of us who were good players, we're going to play these sequels and we're going to be very good. And a lot of them were, Gitz, Lauk, all these players that had played the other versions kept playing the new ones. So actually, when they held these big tournaments in the game, a lot of people thought, right, well, obviously these guys are going to win them all. Obviously someone like Gitz did do very well, and people like Lauk were the top players. But the idea that someone was going to come in from Quake and was going to win the tournament against these people who were like the gods of Unreal, basically, it seemed pretty ridiculous. Now, how did he do it?
Basically, whenever I switched to it, and I said to one of my friends that, I'm going to go 100% on it, and I'm going to destroy everyone in a bit, then he laughed at me. But I did go into it 100%, and whenever I was waking up, I was not even taking a breath. I just go right into the game, practice against whoever top opponent I could find, and that's pretty much how I actually came into the game very cocky, saying, like the very cocky, I would say, cocky Quake player. Like Quake is a master game. If you master Quake, you can master any other game. So I said that, and I did that.
Okay. And was it actually, because obviously one of the things is, people might not realize this, but because in theory they're both FPS games and they were both 1v1 games as well, but obviously Unreal and Quake are very different. Famously, obviously from the movement system, even the weapons, because you have the secondary fire, etc. And so as a result, first of all, not many Quake players ever even tried to play Unreal, because usually Quake was going on at the same time. But I don't think many of them would have been successful. I think it's a very different type of game, right? So were there things that you had to change? Were there actually things in Unreal that suited you more than Quake?
The thing is, Unreal Tournament is a very heavy, it's kind of heavy game, which is particularly my style. You can play with just I'm gonna call it the ray gun, but it's a lightning gun in Unreal Tournament, yes. and the shock rifle. And you just have to use your the shield in a smart way, and that's pretty much it. The movement system is actually easy to master after a while. You don't really need to practice all that much to become good at Unreal Tournament, if you're coming from Quake, that is.
Okay. So when you were at this tournament, and like I said, when you think of some of these names, actually I remember one of the things about this tournament was not only was you winning a surprise, but okay, the other people who were in the tournament, a bunch of those were surprises. I remember the Devil MC guy, he wasn't expected to do super well. Falcon was a good player, but he was an up-and-coming player. At the time, as I kind of referenced before, a lot of people were like, right, it's Lauke's chance now, this is when he's supposed to win, he's supposed to be the best player. What was the actual tournament like for you in terms of were these players that you had a lot of experience playing against? Were you an underdog against some of these players? What was it like in that sense?
I don't think I was really an underdog. unless you actually expect me to choke online, which would have been true a few years back. But I was already dominating all the online tournaments before ESWC, so I don't think it was that much of a surprise that I did well at ESWC 2005. I don't know. I guess everyone would have put someone like QuakeLive or Lucio as a winner anyway. Devil MC was one of the big surprise because that guy actually doesn't practice online or didn't prior to ESWC anyway.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, I don't think it was that much of a surprise.
So as someone coming from Quake, where obviously to this day people really revere Quake and QuakeLive and think those are the best versions of the game, another aspect that was very different about Unreal was the way like map control worked, where with like the different types of the armor and the power-ups were very different, and you actually had power-ups in 1v1, right, in that game? So what, in that sense...
No, you don't have power-up in 1v1.
They had them turned off, okay, right.
Yeah.
So was it a very different game to get your head around in terms of the strategy?
Yeah, I think one of the big things player actually didn't take advantage of is the little vials. Because you don't have any, on any of the maps, you don't have any mega health that put your health above 100, but the vials do.
Yes. And
they were not taking advantage of it, which I think is a mistake. Like so many players actually, they didn't play smart around their stack or whatever. One of the big examples of that is they would still take fights, long range fights, if they were under 70 health, which is what the lightning gun is going to do as damage long range.
Yeah.
Instead of just like playing super safe, have the shield on whenever he sees you if you are under 70 health. The control wasn't, there was not such a thing as map control per se, I would say. Obviously the belt is still, it's called the belt, the big armor in online tournament. The belt is still going to be a big thing if you get it, but at the same time the weapons do so much damage, they're so powerful that if you play the fighting game right, it's not going to matter anyway. You just have to be super careful and not get caught in a bad position.
Okay. Because one of the interesting things was you came into this game, as we said, from Quake, and it was a surprise. You shocked everyone. You won the event. But you weren't in Unreal Tournament that long because actually, obviously, Quake 4 came out at the end of that year and you went off and became a Quake player. Did you only play Unreal because it was, at the time, it was kind of a lull for Quake? There wasn't really a big Quake esports scene at the time. There weren't as many big tournaments. In fact, at the time, people were still playing Quake 3 and it was obviously the Prasman who was very small. Was that the only reason you went into Unreal? Did you always want to play Quake? And so when a new Quake came out, why did you switch straight back over?
I can't remember why. I don't know. I wanted something new, and it was actually fun to play it. Like unlike most Quake players, I would say I'm more open to changes. Like I don't have to have the Quake movement system to actually enjoy the game. I would say I still enjoy the Quake movement system more, just because it's more like fluid. But I really didn't mind the non-retirement movement system.
So when you came into Quake 4, which is the version we're talking about now, this was the time where most Quake 4 tournaments, because it actually had a pretty big circuit, there was a tournament like pretty much every month, and people kind of went all in because, funnily enough, because some people had seen like the Painkiller World Tour the year before, people wanted Quake 4 to be like that. So a lot of the top players actually were very dedicated even for that time, and we're playing every tournament, we're playing constantly, we're practicing with each other. And so actually, if you ever go and look at Quake 4 tournaments, the results are pretty consistent. Like obviously Toxjq wins the majority of them, but like, Stermy, Cooler, Cypher, these players are all in the mix, and they're nearly always the top 4, and it's just what order they're in, etc. But you had another ESWC where you did the same shit, right? You came into Quake 4, and ESWC, right? I remember this is the one that didn't have Toxjq because he was at QuakeCon, I think, at the same exact time.
Toxjq was there.
Oh, he was?
I know. I did beat him in a group stage. Second group stage.
No, you're right. Actually, Cypher beat him. My mistake. Okay, but this was the one where it had all the unusual results. So, Cypher made the final, and at the time Cypher actually wasn't a big name. People won't know that. They'll know him now and think he was a legendary player, but this is actually one of his first big results. Yeah, and so you managed to win the next year in ESWC, but in a different game in Quake 4. Did Quake 4 suit you?
I wouldn't say yes, but I did practice a lot anyway for it. Like, I think a slightly slower game actually would be better for me with the crouch sliding and stuff. That's I don't know actually. It's hard to tell because at the same time I didn't do as well on Quake 3.
Yes.
Than I did on Quake 4, but I think that part was in majority because I was like too young and too stressed. I couldn't handle the pressure before. But I didn't think I was one of the best at the movement in Quake 4 because of the couch sliding mechanic. Like, I didn't think I was that good at it. But I don't think it was that necessary to be good at it at the same time. So I don't know if that was the best game for me. I guess UT still was the best game for me just because it's that head scan heavy.
It's hit scan only, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's your strength in general?
Yeah. I would say so. I think most people know me as a very high accuracy player in most of the games.
Okay. So in this one, as I said, not only was this kind of a one-off in terms of how bizarre the results were compared to the rest of Quake 4 pretty much, but this was also one where it's not like you then went on and then went to all the other Quake 4 tournaments and won them all. So this was kind of a one-off. What do you think happened at this tournament? Like, why was this just your tournament? Why were you in such form?
I just practiced a lot. That's just it. When I was 18, I could just play 12 hours a day and not care about anything else. And that's so important to be able to play that much and keep the motivation up to be sure you're going to be confident going into the tournament. I think that's my biggest, the biggest thing for me. I don't think I was. It was that much of a surprise either because I was doing well in online tournaments anyway. I went before that. I went to Coventry Line where I reached the final against Fuki and lost the final eventually. I actually beat him in the upper bracket but lost in the grand final. And then I actually qualified to the transatlantic showdown with Cooler to play against Socrates and Chaotix in New York. So I don't think it was that much of a surprise again that I did well. I guess it might be surprising in a way that you actually won another tournament the year before, but I think most people knew me and kind of expected me to do well. Maybe not in the whole thing, but yeah.
Does the fact you've had success in all these different games, do you think, are you like a particularly skilled player at FPS games? Are you just very quick to pick up on strategy? Do you think things carry over? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think it might sound like high ego shit, but I think I'm very smart at figuring out. How to play the game. And as I said, I'm also very good in terms of aim, probably one of the best on Quake. I would say most people agree. And that's it. You just have to be smart.
One thing about this win, like I said, obviously you hadn't won any of the big tournaments before, but actually at the time there was a little bit of controversy because a lot of people complained that you had a custom config, right? And you had was it the graphics settings you had, or what exactly was the situation? Because I remember it was some of the other players kind of complained that you'd figured something out or you had something in your config that gave you a little edge.
Well, it's that's actually quite ironic because if I want to compare it to something, it was just using PicMip on Quake 3. It was just not entirely removing the texture, but it would change the texture in a way where it would make the game you would get a slightly better visibility. Is what I'm saying. Yes.
Whereas obviously Quake 4 famously it was pretty dark and there was lots of graphics, right? Yeah,
it would become a bit brighter. Have the texture on the wall kind of removed. The rocket splash, you wouldn't see the high detail rocket splash. It would be a block. That kind of thing. The shaft would be the PicMip shaft and stuff. So yes, you would get a better visibility, and everyone had access to it as long as you know where to go in the config. But if I compare it to anything else, it's just Quake 3 with PicMip, except it's Quake 4. It's the same concept. and it was allowed. So I don't know where the controversy is coming from.
So one of the bizarre things is you kept playing Quake 4, and the next year you also had a pretty decent result at ESWC. You finished 3rd place, I think it was. You were in the top 4. Was there something just special about playing in your home country or not having to travel or something? Why do you think so many of your results came at ESWC?
Well, mostly because, I didn't participate in a lot of tournaments outside Europe, actually. At the time, when I was 18, I could barely speak English. So I was like kind of scared to travel alone, like when you have to go across the country, you're 18 years old, you can't even speak a language to communicate with anyone. Then like I didn't really feel motivated to go across the world, So I didn't participate in any tournament really besides, there was one, I don't know if I even want to get into it. There was one right after ESWC, like 4 or 5 days after it, which was called, it was in Dallas, the Intel Extreme Masters.
Yes,
and
SVG.
Yeah, and I didn't go past the group stage there because I actually had my bag stolen at the airport. There was a big conspiracy or whatever, and I didn't have half of my stuff, no clothes, and I was young, so I had no money to buy anything either.
Wait a minute, when you say when you say there was a conspiracy, did you actually think someone stole it on purpose?
Yeah. There was a big plot at the Charles de Gaulle airport in Paris where like 21 people were involved, actually. They were just stealing bags from people.
Okay.
Not a conspiracy against me, just a conspiracy to steal bags.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what happened. At the same time, I was talking to one of the EG guy. I was asking if there was some room, and they said, yeah, sure, we have a slot for you. And at the end, when I arrived, they didn't have any like room for me whatsoever. So I had to sleep on the floor the whole week as well. Just to summarize, no clothes, no stuff, slept on the floor. At that event, I didn't go past the group stage 5 days after winning ESWC. That was a bad week for me. I will always remember it for the bad reasons.
So, okay, tell me this then. I realise, obviously I was back in those days, I was around then, so I know it's not as simple as now, but someone who's an outsider will naively think, well, you've won ESWC twice, you've been in all these different games, how come you don't just get onto a top gaming team? How come you weren't on SK or whichever team it might be, Fnatic, these are all the big teams at the time. Why weren't you in a position where you were being sent to all the big tournaments and all that stuff? Were you just bad at networking? You didn't have the connections? What was it?
I guess so. I didn't really contact anyone. I was waiting for offers to come in. I actually had Razer at the time after ESWC 2006 contact me. We had a one-on-one FaceTime. He wanted to make an offer, which he did. But like after that, I didn't hear from them at all. So I don't know. I just didn't get any offers besides that. Okay. There was also that shady Chinese team wanted to make an offer as well, like what was the name, like WNV or something like that, the Chinese team.
Oh yes, they had a Counter-Strike team as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the interesting things is this is all like 10 years or more ago, but you were still around Quake when we had QuakeLive, etc. So did you actually just continue to play on like a semi-pro level for a number of years? Did you take a step back from trying to be a full-on pro?
Pretty much, actually. I had some like health condition. I wouldn't say it. Like I had a surgery in early 2008, and after that, I really didn't feel like traveling whatsoever because I felt bad physically. I mean, like I had a pneumothorax, if you know what that is.
Oh, what is that?
Like it's just some air between the lung and what we call the pleura, I think, and it's not supposed to be there, and it hurts. So I had to put like a tube inside my chest to like suck the air out, and so I had a few days at the hospital, and then I didn't feel well physically after that. I didn't feel like traveling at all. Instead, I actually started playing poker professionally. Which I did good? For I made it. I made a living out of it for a few years. So I would say good enough.
And were you just like a cash game player, or did you play in tournaments?
Cash game player, mostly online because like live poker is so slow.
Okay. And are you someone then, if you like, by the way, for just as reference for people listening, that's actually a very famous thing that a lot of people in 1v1 games went and did, because, I mean, it's actually quite logical. If you're playing a game that involves any kind of strategy and it's 1v1, right, in esports, you have to almost win the tournament to make any money. In poker, you just have to be better than the people at the table you're playing at. Like, so a lot of people kind of figure that out who were like StarCraft players, Quake players, and there's a reason why I think a lot of them went and did that for a while. Did you ever think to yourself, I'm just going to be a poker player and never come back to esports? Were you always playing games on the side?
No, I always played games all the time just because like that's what I like to do. I played poker because it was a financial opportunity. When I think back, like I don't think I was actually happy playing poker, and like some people theorize it's very hard to be happy when you play poker because when you are a winning poker player, it's expected to win, but when you lose, it's and it never compensates. When you win, like you're not gonna get as happy as depressed you're gonna get if you're losing. So I think that's a good thing I got away from it.
Is it not like that in esports though? I mean, in esports, you can do all the right things and lose the game sometimes.
It's becoming more and more true, yes. But I don't think it's that it's as frustrating. Most of the time, you can only blame yourself. Sure.
So one of the interesting things is, if everyone's been paying attention to the interview so far, you were playing 1v1 games. You were a duelist. So when you then switched and you were playing, we had QuakeLive, you were playing TDM, later on Shootmania, Overwatch. These are all team games. Is there a reason why you made the switch to play team games? Because, for example, when I referenced you playing QuakeLive had a 1v1 scene, and, you know, there was some half-decent money, and these are all players you've played with in the past. Why not be a one-on-one player? Why become a team player?
Well, I didn't like some of the changes they made to 1v1 on QuakeLive, like the time limit being reduced to 10 instead of 15. Yes. I think it increases the randomness.
Yes.
You could argue like, the best players are still winning, but like it's all things put together. I didn't really like the fact there was 7 maps in the map pools, which I think is way too many if you want to be like very good on each one of them. Because I know from experience that you need to play a shit ton of every single one of them if you want to be able to compete with some of the best players. And I wasn't really ready to put that much time into it. Or not ready, but like I couldn't put that much time into it. I was still like making a lot of money playing poker, so why would I spend that much time on something that's not gonna reward me financially? It didn't make any sense. So yeah, it's all things put together. Like it didn't make any sense financially. It didn't make. I didn't like the fact the maps. Most of the maps we were playing were old. Like it was still like the TN, DM13, fucking DM6. that wasn't. There wasn't any motivation for me to play that kind of game really. And I had more fun just playing the team mode at the time.
So when you played TDM in QuakeLive, the team you were on is actually a pretty legendary team, because the interesting part about it is everyone in the team is like a name, but from a different kind of era. So obviously Stermy and Toxjq come from the dual world. I mean, I realize for old school players, Toxjq was always a TDM player because he came from the old Ice Climbers team. But at this point in time, he's most famous for being a duelist, you know? And then obviously you'd actually been playing dual games in the past, but now you're a team player. And then the fourth guy was Lincoln, who actually, funnily enough, was famous for CTF. It wasn't even as a TDM player. So you had a very weird mix of players. And also, you and Lincoln are from France, but the others, like one's from Italy, one's from Sweden. Were you just a bunch of friends? Had you played together before you were in a team together? How did this squad come together as a team?
No, that's I actually don't know, because they were all 4 together with Fox instead of me at first. But Fox had to cancel the DreamHack out because he was having a baby, I think, at the time. And I was friends with Lincoln. I knew I was good, and I'd started ringing for them because Fox was unavailable because of the baby, and I did end up playing with them because I thought that was a good add to the team, like good item control, whatever. That's just because I was friend with Lincoln, and then I became friend with Stermy and Toxjq.
Okay. So if you're in a team like this, right, for anyone who doesn't know what Quake TDM was like, but I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this might be from Overwatch or might know modern day, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, team games in general, right? Nowadays, people understand that there's different roles and you play different aspects, but people might not realize TDM in Quake is always like that. Like, it's not a coincidence that one player gets the quad every time it's up, or that one player gets to get the red armor or gets the nice spot, and then there's often a player who has the shittest spot, who has to just cess against the red armor and just uses machine gun all the time, or whatever it might be, a role that sucks, and you're never going to be the guy who looks good, right? If you're playing in a team with Toxjq, legendary sort of carry player in TDM, Stermy, a guy who's got fantastic aim, Lincoln was the star of this CTF teams, did you get the shitty roles in this team?
It's not as bad as the other games where you have someone who's gonna sit still or do like the shitty role and always get a bad damage or bad net, whatever. It's not as bad. Obviously, some of the players had some role, like you don't have a role per se, but you're gonna attribute that. Yeah, you're gonna control that item. Someone's gonna control that item. Someone's gonna control that area. For example, Stermy, he probably had one of the best frag gun in the game. So obviously, we're gonna put him at the ray gun area and just control that area by himself most of the time. So it's not as bad. You might not do as much damage as the other one, just because they're in position where they're gonna meet more enemy. It's the more controlled or contested area. But I can't complain about the position I was put in. It just depends on the map too. So like on WestPDM5, for example, I will play on the Mega Ray Gun area with Stermy, which is fine. And then you will have Toxjq and Lincoln more on the red area. So they're gonna do more damage and get more frags because if you don't control the ray gun area, that's where you want to go. That's what you want to control when you are out of control on the map. But it's like it didn't bother me. Like it doesn't really matter as long as your teammates value your effort and what you're doing in your position.
So one thing that people always complained about in Quake 3 and in QuakeLive about TDM is that obviously in that game, the starting weapon, the machine gun, is pretty strong for a gun you just spawn without. And so famously, it means that it does change the dynamic of the game because, if your opponent kills you but they have low health and you spawn near them, then in theory you can kill them with the starting weapon, right? I know for 1v1 people always complain about that, but especially for TDM they did because they felt like it took away a bit of the strategy and it made it a little bit more like just fragging wins the games to some degree. How true is that, do you think? Like, was there still a decent amount of strategy and was it generally still the smarter teams that won?
No, I don't think the smarter team usually won. You have to have a lot of fragging power, a lot of aim, just because the reason that you don't control the area is still a thing, but there's not as much as before because you can just grab the weapon and drop it to whoever needs it. So you don't control areas like you did before in Quake 3, and you can just assess now with how the machine gun, how strong the machine gun is, and it depends on the map too. Like you can't really, like on OSPD5 again, if I want to make an example, you can't really assess the quad area because you're just taking jump pad. It just depends on the map. But I think it's not necessarily true like the best team win, the smarter team wins the game. It's mostly, it's a combination of both. Obviously you can't play just dumb as shit. You're not going to win the game by doing that. You need to have some sort of strategy, and you also need to have the fragging power to outfrag the opponent because QuakeLive was all about that. It was less about strategy and more about fragging power. Okay.
So since you played with some of these guys in a number of different games and for many years, I want to ask you about some of them. So let's just start with Toxjq then, because obviously a very, very famous Quake player. What's Toxjq like as a teammate, as a player?
Honestly, I don't think you can get a better teammate than Toxjq. Like he's so calm, so willing to work on whatever the issues are. If there are some issues, it's hard to ask much more of him. Honestly, I can't complain about anything. about him. Like I can't complain about him at all. He was like probably one of the best teammates I ever had across my entire career.
Was he the best aimer?
It's hard to argue against that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, but we were all aim monster in our team. Like
Yes.
there was a moment on OSP 5 again where we're playing. I think we're playing the final or the semi-final. I think we're playing the final, and NVC was casting the game at the time. He's like going through all of us. He's like, wait a second, 80%, 82, 81. Like everyone is at above 80% accuracy on the ray gun. Just like you go through all of us, and we're just setting everything. But yeah, it's hard to argue about against Toxjq being one of the best aimer, if not the best aimer in the world.
Okay. As I referenced before, Lincoln is actually most famous for CTF. In fact, actually, French teams had some very legendary CTF teams across Quake 3 and QuakeLive. And that's one of the things I always found weird, because actually he is a guy who tried a lot in the 1v1 tournaments. He went to a whole bunch of them and he tried to play and tried to be a 1v1 pro. But for some reason, you could see in CTF he had skill, but it never seemed to translate in a 1v1. What was he like as a player?
Oh yeah, the thing about Lincoln is like, yeah, he's very naturally talented, but he doesn't have the mind to actually play 1v1. Like he's not patient enough.
Okay.
He's the kind of player that will, I would say, whine about whoever is camping in the corner, because that's what makes sense strategically. Okay, he's not patient enough to actually be able to perform in 1v1, I think, which is the same, because yeah, he's very talented. Like it's more, that's why he's so good at CTF. He's more the kind of player that will run around and just hit crazy shots or move fast or crazy good movements. That's more his style.
Okay. So Stermy, not only did you play with him in Quake, and obviously he was in Quake 4 before as a 1v1 player, but he's someone who was with you in the Shootmania days afterwards.
Yeah.
Have you got some sort of special connection with Stermy? Is there a reason why you kept playing with him for so long?
I guess we just became friends after the couple of remarks we played together, and we decided to give it a shot to that new game. Man, it didn't end up quite work out quite well, I would say, since we won quite a few tournaments on Shootmania as well.
What's he actually like as a teammate?
Like he's kind of like Toxjq, very calm. It's hard to see him whine about anything at all. Like he's not the whiny type. It's very easy to work with in general. I can't really complain about him either. Like he's a pretty good guy to play with.
As I referenced before, TDM was never that huge in QuakeLive. It had a scene and it had some LANs, but in general, 1v1 was still the big game. After that, there was the period where, even though in theory QuakeLive still had like QuakeCon and it had the odd tournament, this is actually the period where you got like Shootmania had a little brief period where it was actually being tried as like one of the main FPS games, because Quake was dying out. Obviously, one of the unique things about Shootmania at the time was the developer did put in a bunch of money, and there were a bunch of tournaments at big events, IPLs, DreamHacks, etc. So people did switch over and try, and obviously you and Stermy, and you took your brother and you had a team, and then obviously Strengths and a whole bunch of players, Stermy actually, a whole bunch of players, Rafa, they did try to play it. Was it actually a good game? Did you actually enjoy playing Shootmania?
No. No.
Because you know most people think that all you Quake players just played it and trying to win the money, basically.
Yeah, but well, it was a financial opportunity. Like the scene was so small and the money was quite good. Like I made like 20,000 in a year just playing a couple of tournaments, 2 or 3 tournaments. Like that was just a big financial opportunity. The game wasn't good enough, not by a long shot.
Were there elements of it that could have kind of been redeemed? Like, could you have tweaked it a little bit and made it a good esports game? What was its big problem?
Like, just to anything, the whole game is too simplistic to begin with. There were so many broken things. I did advocate well, not advocate, that's not the word I want to use for, but like I did try to make them change the gravity, like because it felt like whenever you're jumping, you're on the freaking moon, which makes the whole thing is a joke. Like you need to jump in order to use the stamina, but if you jump, it's a fucking moon. So whenever you jump, you're so vulnerable to any shot, like rockets, whatever, ray gun. And one of the things I dislike in games now is like the faster you die, the more random the game is going to be. And that's one of the aspects I dislike on Counter-Strike, for example. As in, if you're unlucky, it can turn games around. And there are times on Shootmania where you just die from a single rail. Like whenever the attacker is railing you, you die as a defender. So, and it became very common to actually spam around corner with the ray gun just to get that one pick, and that one pick can make you win the round and potentially turn around the game. Like just too many aspects I didn't like.
Okay. So after Shootmania, obviously, I mean, played some more Quake, but people now know you quite famously from Overwatch, because this is a game where pretty early on you were involved in the scene, you were playing. Were you someone who was all in on the idea that, like, obviously Overwatch is a game that we knew when it was launched was going to have developer support, and in theory they were promising big things even from the beginning. Were you all in on the idea of being a pro in Overwatch?
That was the goal, yes. I did expect the game to get quite big just because of the fact it's coming from Blizzard. I think that's always a recipe for success, you know. So yes, I kind of tried to go all in, yeah.
So when you, in your early teams, as I referenced, AKM, your brother, was playing with you in Shootmania as well, and he played with you in Rogue as well, right? He is known, obviously, DPS player, pretty skilled player. You said before you thought your aim was really good in Quake and Unreal Tournament. Why isn't winz? Why wasn't it a brother DPS combo? Why weren't you just both DPS players?
Just because of the fact the players I was playing with, they are all young people, and someone has to do the dirty job, you know.
Okay.
Someone has to take on it. And since I was a more mature one, and I didn't really care all that much as long as they do their job. That's my condition. And they did, so can't really argue about that. At the time when we teamed up with Vic, Vic was regarded as one of the best players in the world. Probably still is, actually. He's very good on so many picks. It's hard to argue with that. Like, yeah, he's going to be a DPS, and my brother is going to be a DPS because, well, it's hard to argue with someone younger with a big ego, you know. So I'm going to take like the more mature role and do what it takes in order to make us win. That's it.
Yes. Could you have been a DPS player? A good one?
I think so, yes. In the its kind of role, yeah, definitely. Probably not in the projectile heroes like Pharah, Genji, whatever. Probably not. Maybe not at the level I should have been, because that's not my strength. Like, my strength is kind of weapons. So I would have played like McCree, Soldier, Tracer, whatever, I think at the highest level.
Okay. Because obviously, like, the context of when I'm doing this interview is not that long after when you made this tweet, which we won't get into all the details of, but when you made this tweet about players kind of like getting into Overwatch League based on politics, people's reply to that was sort of, I mean, here's the thing, I get that most people don't know who you are outside of Overwatch. So what they thought was, wait a minute, the fucking Lucio players saying that all these good players aren't getting in. So they think to themselves, Lucio player equals shittest player, like just shot calls only. And so they assume you're not a good player, and they were all sort of like, shut the fuck up, winz, you don't know anything. But as I say, people who know you outside of Overwatch know you're a player who in theory prides himself on his skill, right? You didn't have to be a Lucio player.
No, well, I had to for the good of the team. That's it. Yes. I don't know what else to say. I just had to.
Okay. What do you think about that stereotype then? Because, like, as I said, that really is what even some pro players talk like, as though Lucio is just, like, it's not even Overwatch. You're just playing your own mini game where you run around the map, pressing the same buttons and shot calling the team. It's got to be more nuanced than that, surely.
Well, when we did dominate the NA scene for like 8 months or whatever, whenever we moved to NA in the beginning of the year, like my only role really within the game, and that you can see on the stream, is that I'm just pushing the payload, because that was part of the strategy I was pushing for. As in, like, most professional players actually don't understand the game quite well. Like I would say even 90%, judging by how the other teams are playing.
Okay. In what context?
Like they don't really understand the concept of the advantage of position, that kind of thing, even if it means you have to fight as 5. They don't understand that it's better to have the payload never stop and fight as 6 at the choke point with the position advantage. And that's why we did dominate for this long, because I was pushing for the strategy from the very beginning, where I'm just, AFK on payload for the most part. And then, like, yes, I'm not doing anything really when you look at the game, but like, you know, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. It's quite sad that you get branded as a shitty player because you're doing the shitty role, you know?
Yes.
Like, but like, there is not much I can do about that. And some pro players actually say, yeah, he got carried. Well, yeah, that was that's a strategy we went for, because I think that's the most effective strategy in the game.
Okay.
Obviously, the Lucio is not gonna carry the fucking game. Yes, the Lucio gets carried. That's just common sense.
Is it actually fun to play Lucio though? Like it's fun to win, sure, but is it actually fun to play?
To me, no. To me, no. Just because I like to be one of the impact players, obviously. But as I said, someone had to like put the ego aside and just do it, because we did need to do that for the good of the team.
So to take us back in time a second, for people who don't remember, in the early days of the first real tournaments in Overwatch, so obviously I don't give a fuck about all those online cups, etc. Like, yeah, great. I mean, I realize in the modern day everything's online cups, but at the time we had some real lands. We had the ESL Atlantic Showdown, we had the Overwatch Open, we had APEC, we had Apex over in Korea. We had a whole bunch of tournaments towards the end of 2016, and your team, admittedly a slightly different version, when you had the 2 Swedes in, you had Reinforce, you had Tvik, you were the ones who kind of scored first blood. You took down that ESL Overwatch Atlantic Showdown. Now, this was the tournament where, if people can remember the context, because it had all been online before that, that was when the EnVyUs team, which admittedly is a very different EnVyUs lineup to now, was winning everything. Like, they were just wrecking everyone. They had this ridiculous streak online. When you came into this tournament, was your team one where, did you actually think you were going to be able to win the tournament? Were they the clear team that in theory you should have won?
No, I think it was kind of expected that the Europeans will do a bit better than the Americans.
You never bought into the EnVyUs hype?
Like, the thing is, the big winning streak they had was in NA. And we had a similar winning streak when we moved to NA. Like, before, I would say the NA scene was a lot weaker than the European one. I think it actually turned around because, well, Overwatch League is going to happen in NA, so all the best players actually moved to NA, and now NA is probably much better than the European, in my opinion. So I wouldn't put that much emphasis, like I wouldn't put that much importance into their winning streak at the time, well, last year, because they were just farming weak NA teams, in my opinion.
Okay.
And you can see that, like, well, they did face one European team, well, more than one because they're playing in a group stage, but they did face one European team in the playoff at that Atlantic Showdown, and they lost to that one European team. They faced only one European team at the Overwatch Open in Atlanta, and they lost again quite convincingly. So I think it's fair to say, like, I don't think it's unfair to say that their winning streak was due to playing like a much weaker field. I don't think you could dominate at the time as hard the European team. It's impossible. It was always going back and forth between us and United and Creation. Just the level was much higher in Europe.
So obviously one of the interesting situations that happened was when we had Apex launch in Korea, and you guys went over there, and it was very weird because I remember you were actually playing the group stage of Apex, but then you went and played the APAC tournament in China that you won, where you played, like, I mean, I think it was Africa. Let me think. It was Lunatic-Hai in the final, right? It was just before they got super good, right? So they were obviously still a good team in Korea. So you had all these Asian tournaments going on there. And in the first season of Apex, for people who can't remember, what happened was you were actually considered one of the favourites to win the tournament. And in the quarterfinals, you lost to a different EnVyUs lineup. And not only was it different, but this is the one where they just brought in that Mickey guy to play D.Va, which somehow almost seems like something out of a movie, because it was like the perfect exact moment to bring this guy in, and exactly the hero that seemed like it was not necessarily OP, but a bit broken in its own way. What happened in that matchup? Because in theory, you guys were favoured before we saw how it played out to win the matchup, and people thought you were going to go far. Were you unlucky? What do you think of their move to bring him in?
I don't think we lost because we were unlucky. I think that's just because a big patch. That's why they did recruit Mickey, I guess. A big update happened like a few days before the match, like literally 4 or 5 days before the match, and it actually shook up the meta pretty hard. Before then, it was the Beyblade meta with Reaper, May, that kind of thing, and that's probably the meta we were the best at by far. I mean, we were dominating everyone, like all our matches in Apex. In the group stage, like it was just devastation, like 3-0, 3-0, even when we felt we didn't play good. And the patch happened right before the quarterfinal against EnVy. I think that's a patch that did favor them quite a lot, because in the previous patch, I don't think they would have. I won't say any chance, because everyone has a chance to some degree, but like I think we were big favorites to win against them on that patch. And yeah, it was lucky in a sense that the patch happened right before the match.
Right. Coming in, did you actually know though that they were going to take this approach? And like, because obviously, as you've referenced before, like Tavik at the time was actually considered arguably the best player, and it did seem like this was a matchup problem that they could the D.Va was just on him all day long. Yeah,
I think the biggest problem we had is like we switched to a meta from a meta where the DPS were actually carrying, to a meta where the tanks have to be the carry. Mostly D.Va, Reinhardt, and Rodog, and I don't think any other tanks, just because of the lack of practice on those particular heroes, were at the highest level or good enough. And they did bring like Mickey, who was very good on D.Va already, which is a surprise because D.Va was really a part of the meta.
Yes.
So like, you can't really prepare for the next meta. So the patch just happened, and we're not good enough to actually beat everyone on those heroes. We didn't do bad, but we actually lost 3-2 against EnVy, regardless of the meta. And they did end up winning the tournament quite convincingly in the end. But yeah, like obviously some regrets, like kinda bitter about it, because I think we had a really strong chance of winning the tournament.
Do you feel a bit hard done by, though, the fact that you had to play them in the first round? So as a result, on paper it says you came 5th, 8th, but no one can ever know. Were you the second best team? Were you the 4th best team? We can't know, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't say we were the second best team at all. At the time, in practice, just after the patch happened, actually, we were practicing against mostly the Kongdu teams, and we were getting rolled, like really rolled. Like we would play like 23 maps and we would win 1 out of 23. Like we were getting rolled. Like it was their meta, the Reinhardt, D.Va, Rodog, and Soldier crap, and you couldn't play anything else because nothing worked. Like the D.Va was just too strong. Everything was just too strong in that meta. You couldn't play anything else. That's the composition you had to play, and we were not excelling at it, not in just 4 days. So in just those 4 days, we're playing against Kongdu a lot, which we thought was by far the best team, because we also played a bit of EnVyUs, and EnVyUs was not even close. Well, they were not close to beating us as hard as Kongdu was beating us, but they did end up winning against Kongdu in the semi-final, I think, anyway, which was a big surprise, actually, but yeah.
So one of the interesting things about that era, because it was the Western teams first properly going to Korea and getting to see like the best Western teams playing against the Korean teams and figuring out who the good Korean teams were, is okay, at the beginning of the first Apex split, it was very up in the air. No one really knew, like, are any of them really that good? But by the end of the split, obviously you could see that a couple of them are getting pretty good, and then the next seasons they got better and better and better. Could you already tell when you first went, I mean, you've referenced here how in scrims you were about to get wrecked by the Kongdu teams. Could you already tell that Korea was going to be very good in this game?
I don't think Korea is going to be bad at any game they play if you actually dedicate themselves to it.
What do you think was, what did they seem good at even in the first seasons?
Well, mostly positioning and team play, I guess. When we played against Lunatic-Hai at APAC, we had some big issues on route. We actually lost the map. We lost in the group stage to them twice before we beat them in the final. And we played on route twice, and we didn't go past the first point twice, just because they had this weird positioning that you can't exploit. And before, like, at the time it was the Beyblade meta where you play fucking Reaper, but with the positioning you couldn't use the Reaper whatsoever, or the Mei. You couldn't block anyone. And I guess that's one of the biggest strengths. Also, we played very undisciplined, I think, against them the first time. As in, we did give Miro a lot of energy on his Zarya. That's why he was able to do so much. So we did adjust for the final, and he wasn't able to do anything anymore. But yeah, I think their biggest strengths probably strategies, positioning, overall.
I remember at the time, one of the things that when people tried to find like general patterns, people used to say that they thought like Koreans had like the best support type players and that the Westerners were the ones with the best DPS. Do you think that's accurate?
I would say so, but I think that, yeah, you can find equally good support players in the West as well.
Okay. Right. After this was when the infamous shuffle happened, which everyone forgets was technically a three-way shuffle. It was technically Luminosity, Rogue-Misfits. It's just that who really gives a fuck, because the Luminosity didn't exactly get the really good players and no one really heard of them after that. It was very different lineup. So realistically, we only really care about the Misfits and the Rogue trade, because the French players went over to join your team in a Rogue, you got Soon, etc. And then the Swedish players, Reinforced Vic, went over to Misfits to join the Swedes. Okay, right. In terms of the nationalities, this trade makes total sense. Like, Swedish players wanted to play Swedish players, French players were French players. But I don't buy the idea that this was like, it's like, you know, when someone says like, oh, I broke up with my girlfriend. Yeah, it was a totally mutual understanding. You know, we both just knew it wasn't time, right? I don't ever believe that's the case. I think what happens is, you know, one person decides this is what I want to do, and then the other person has to either battle them or say, okay, I accept that. So how did this trade really come about? Like, which set of people wanted to make this trade happen?
Well, that's pretty much like you said. I think just Vic wanted to get out for multiple reasons, which I will not go into.
Okay.
But yeah, mostly Tvik reinforced I think it was mostly Tvik wanted to get out and actually have a full Swedish team, which he thought he would do better with. Probably, he felt like at the time.
So, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the move, is that at the time, most people thought that Misfits won the trade. They thought, well, they got like one of the best tank players, they got one of the best. Obviously, Tvik was just considered actually the best all around. And yeah, you got Soon, etc. It was pretty good, and you got a decent trade, but most people thought their team was supposed to be better. Now, after seeing them at a bunch of tournaments, and they've had a lot of time now, I think we can pretty consistently, you know, it's pretty conclusive that you won the trade. Did you actually think at the time, though, that this was a bad move for you? Did you worry about what would happen to your team?
No, I wasn't worrying at all. Like, I don't know if I really want to talk shit, but when Tvik left, he left with a pretty big ego, mostly trashing the performances of some of the players. Well, except Enko, but it's hard to trash Enko's performance. It's always super good. He left with a pretty big ego, thinking he was actually the carry of the team, I think. And well, that's how did he like it now? after they failed.
Why do you think that team failed, though? I mean, they did have a bunch of really good players, right? So what do you think they never figured out, or what was wrong with the composition?
Well, the thing is, I think Vic pushed too much value on himself, and I think he's not very good at juggling others' ability to actually play the game.
Okay.
And I think he overvalued some of the players that he teamed up with in Misfits. There is not much more to it, I think. They just overvalued. He misjudged.
When you made your team and you got soon into the lineup, did you already know him since you were players from the French scene? Like, what was your perception of how you have to play with this guy? What does he need from a teammate, you think?
I didn't really know him personally because I never played with him, but Unco has for a long time. And I knew my brother knew him as well a bit from Shootmania, because he did play Shootmania as well and won a couple of ESWC, I think, with Unco, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, that's it. They just vouched for him. Unco really wanted to play with soon, which I was fine with.
For some reason, okay, you tell me if there's anything to this. There was a reputation around the Rogue team when this all-French lineup formed, which actually does remind me of what I've heard about many French esports players over the years, which was like, the reason, here's the thing, everyone was like, you know, they'd start with the compliment. They'd be like, oh, they're really talented. But you know the but's coming, and it's like, but you know, maybe they're not as disciplined or they're not as dedicated. You know, I know especially that was one of my theories as to why I thought some of the Swedish players left, because Swedish people in general all think they're like the most dedicated. Oh, we're just going to play all day long, you know, and it's all about the team and you know all this shit. So people thought that your team actually wouldn't work, not for skill reasons. They thought it would be a clash, just all these French players together, and it would, you know, maybe it'd only last a while, or the results would be up and down. Why did it go so well?
Well, I guess just because everyone is that good individually. But you're not wrong in saying like most likely the two Swedes had the better discipline overall, I would say. More calm, like not as whiny, like that's just a French thing, you can't avoid it.
Just a lot of complaining in those teams.
Yeah, and like that's what I didn't want to get into, but like, okay, you did figure it out. So yeah, that's one of the reasons Tvig decided to leave, because he wasn't feeling like good. He couldn't take it anymore, like too much wine, too much French wine. So
cultural difference.
Too much wine, and he actually thought as well that he could do better with some other players, well, except Unco. So that's why we did split up.
Okay. When this team was first formed, though, you had that one, like, so first of all, there was the weird period where you guys just stayed in Europe and you didn't go to Apex. Therefore, no one really knew how good your team was because you were just stuck in Europe. There weren't as many LANs back then, and everyone basically only cared about the teams that went to Apex. So why didn't this team go to Apex Season 2?
We just didn't get invited.
That's it? You would have definitely gone otherwise?
To the Season 2, yes. After Season 3, we actually decided not to go again to Apex because I don't think that's an environment you can actually perform well, just because you have to stay in a hotel for 2 or 3 months.
Okay. And
like that's a dark hotel, not a very good one. You just get depressed. I don't think that's good for European. Like most of the people would argue, you would find the best practice in Korea.
Sure.
And yes, you would find your best team to play against in Korea, but at the same time, the conditions are not great, and it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Like we would get depressed just being there. Like you don't like the food there. You don't like the conditions in a setting where the Koreans are doing everything to beat you.
Okay, let me ask you about some of this, and let's break some of this down. So first things first, okay? Right, I can definitely understand if you were in a hotel that you didn't like or something. Yeah, that would put a damper in. But when you say like you don't like the food, like I think a lot of people that are like me who've been to Korea love the food. It's awesome. What do you like? Do you only like French food or something?
No, I'm actually not complicated, but okay. The big thing I don't like about Asian food in general is like they're trying to make everything too tasty.
Spicy, you mean?
Spicy, yeah.
Yes, it's very spicy. I have to say. Yeah.
They're overdoing it. Like it's too much for me. Like I'm fine with plain food, like bland food. Like you give me just rice with nothing, or just a steak, just chicken, whatever. I'm fine. Like I'm not complicated. But when they try too hard to actually have some taste on the food, that's where I start to dislike it, and that's why I mostly dislike the Asian food.
Okay, and then the part that you said there was very interesting, I thought, which is where you said when the Koreans are trying their hardest to beat you. Right, okay, here's a question I have. This isn't even a conspiracy theory. I know for a fact in multiple esports games where people have gone to Korea and have played Koreans, Koreans deny this, but they secretly share information behind the scenes and will just do shit like scrim you and then just tell like the person you're going to play in the match. Now listen, I'm not saying that they all do it like a massive conspiracy, but some of them that are, say, friends in different teams or coaches that are friends from teams, they will just go and tell the other coach, yeah, this is what they do all these things, you know. And you'll think you're coming into the game like, well, this, you know, here's what we've practiced, they're not going to know what we're doing, and then you just find like that they know exactly what you're going to do. Was there some of that going on? I'm
pretty sure, yes. It's like it's impossible to avoid. Like according to IGN, there is some sort of implied agreement where no team actually do that. But I don't really believe that a second. Every time you play someone, like I feel they're prepared, even though you didn't play against that team in particular. So is that luck? I don't believe so. Someone is always gonna talk. Like too many people involved whenever you're practicing.
Okay.
You always like. When you're playing against Koreans, we literally have just our coach or coach manager, and then like you have 4 Koreans just spectating the game. So I guess they just invite their families, their dog, everyone. Like just so many people involved whenever you play a Korean team, and I think it's unlikely that no one is going to talk.
Is this part of the problem that you had at Apex Season 3? Because coming into Apex Season 3, you were pretty hyped. People were like, oh, this new approach they've got to the game could be so good. People actually thought your team was the one out of the Western teams that had a chance to do really, really well. Was this part of it, as aside from the other things we've discussed, the environmental situations of people not liking it, did they figure you out in practice, do you think?
I don't think it did affect our result at all. Like the conspiracy thing, I just think you should go into the match every time knowing they're prepared for you, because they have. But it's everything put together, like the conditions. When we actually arrived in Korea and we started practicing against the Korean teams, the first 2 weeks we were destroying everyone. Like everyone, no one could figure out how to play against our triple DPS, even though like they had a shit ton of bot they could watch from earlier this year. But we were destroying everyone, but eventually they adapted to our play style, how to counter it, and eventually it became harder and harder to win against them. I think if it had been just one weekend tournament, we would have won the tournament against the Koreans. But over 2 months, where they have a strong staff support, where they have analysts, then you show more and more as you practice them, and they adapt to it, and then that's where you start falling down against Korea, because that's where they are really good at, I think, like just preparing strategically, analyzing how they have to play in order to beat you.
What were the key adaptations that countered that style of play?
I think it's just mostly a better use of D.Va. I don't think there is more to it really. Like just a better use of D.Va. Because our biggest strength was to have a very well coordinated attack, coordinated attack on their support or the soldier or whatever target we decide to go for. And the D.Va with the matrix just nullify all of that. Like you just go in, matrix, you can't kill anyone. And when you don't have the divan, then you don't have the survivability that they have, and you end up losing the fight because of it.
Obviously, as well, it turned out that the two Korean teams that beat you in your group did both go to the final. Was that just unlucky? Would it have mattered if you'd have, like, for example, if you'd have had like LW Blue in your group instead of one of them, would you have gotten out of the group?
I think we would have gotten out of any other group, to be honest, because we didn't really have any struggle against any Korean team besides these two. Well, actually, we didn't practice against Lunatic-Hai, so it's hard to tell. It was a big question mark when we had to play them. But we were playing against Kongdu quite a bit, and we were going like 50-50. We knew it was going to be a tough match because they are that good individually and strategically. But we've played a lot of any other teams in other groups, and they didn't feel even close at all. Like Runaway is like a good team, but when we were practicing at Korea, Runaway was actually one of the weakest teams we were playing against. I think we'll have gotten out of the group in any other group. It's just unfortunate they put potentially, we can't really know for sure, like potentially the top 3 in the group. Like it did turn out like Mighty ID was a very tough opponent as well, and we got trashed for losing a map to them. Yeah. But they did beat Kongdu Pantera, and now look where they are. They actually got 3 players for Immortals, and Immortals is stronger than ever, in my opinion.
Yeah. When you were talking before, we were talking about the era where EnVyUs were winning all those online cups, and then they came to Europe and they obviously didn't do very well. In fact, a bunch of the tournaments they underwhelmed. They were still a good team, but they weren't going to win any of those tournaments. In general, what have you actually thought of the NA teams? Like, for example, so you were in Korea when some of the Cloud9 squads were there. They were like at least half NA most of the time, still to this day. Like, was Cloud9 actually a good team when you played them?
When was that?
Well, I know they were there for like season 1 and you're right. They were the season you weren't there, right? So I guess you didn't play them then. So what about NRG then? NRG was there for the first season with, at the time, a pretty hyped lineup, right?
Yeah, they weren't that good in my opinion, but they did change their lineup like massively a few times.
Well,
they were at APAC as well, and like. Yes. I don't think they could have done worse just because, they lost to AF Blue, I think, in the semifinal, if I'm not mistaken.
So, yes. They came top 4.
They came top 4. But like they couldn't really do worse because there was only 2 Korean teams at APAC, and the Chinese team at the time were actually quite bad, like really, really bad. I think they got a lot better now, like they actually are catching up quite fast. But at APAC, they were bad to the point where we wouldn't even want to play against them just because they couldn't go past the first point on most of the map. So it didn't make sense to actually play against them. And Energy, like while not being like good enough to be the top teams, were way above the Chinese anyway. But I don't think they were that great at the time.
From being in NA then, in the modern day of Overwatch, which NA teams actually do you think were good? Again,
when?
You told me. Just pick out any. It doesn't sound like you're impressed by any of them. There's got to be some that were decent. FaZe, Immortals, who was good?
When we started practicing against late July, I think, right before Contenders, and we were practicing against most of the team, we thought Immortals were going to win the Contenders like easy because they were destroying in practice, like really destroying. They were shitting on us so bad. It's like almost close to probably like the Kongdu ratio where they win 20 maps and we win 1. They had such a coordinated attack on our backline all the time and we couldn't do anything. And they turned up to not win anything. So I think Immortals was good then, but they did underperform. And then I think Selfless was a very good team as well.
Okay.
Like that's pretty much the only team that gave us some trouble when we were playing in the online tournaments. When they had Dafran and Sinatra.
Yeah. Sure.
No, go ahead.
What about, I guess I've referenced, obviously you've played with your brother for quite a while now, multiple different games. I notice as a DPS player, even though your team's very good and people think your team's very good, his name doesn't seem to have the same, like it doesn't seem to get put in the same conversations as like the Timus of the world, etc., where people are like, this guy's the best DPS. What is your brother like as a DPS player? Do you consider him as good as these guys?
I consider him one of the best, if not the best, its player. Yes, I would put him way above Teemu. It's just like it's hard to notice him as much because you need to do those flashy plays in order to be noticed.
Yes.
But
yes.
like he doesn't do those flashy plays. It's more like the very consistent kind of player where he's not going to be flashy. He's more like me, I would say. Like I have a low sensitivity. I'm not going to do the big flick and one shot in the head with Widow or whatever like Teemu would. Like, guess that's why Teemu get hyped. But if I was to compare them, I would put AKM way above him. Not because I dislike Teemu or whatever. I just think he's a better Macri and a better aimer in general. And he's more consistent. And he's also confident enough to play on a big stage, which Teemu has admitted not being confident at all. So I just think he's one of the best. That's why I did choose to play with him, not because he's my brother, like because he's good.
Okay. What do you actually, from seeing all the different competitive metas we've had, and some of them people have complained a lot about, like, you know, if people just don't have a player who can play D.Va, for example, it's obviously a problem if you're in that exact period of time, or if you don't have enough good DPS players and everyone's playing like the dive comp or whatever. What's been your favorite overall? Like, what do you think was actually the best for the health of the game, not just for Rogue?
It's hard to be objective about that because you're always going to favor the meta you're good at, you know. But I would say probably the characters which require the most kill.
Okay.
And I would say that's probably the dive meta with the Genji and everything instead of. I don't think Zarya require that much skill to play. It's quite easy.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's hard to tell. I would need to think about it really long time to actually be able to form like an objective opinion on that.
Okay. So just, even though again I'm not going to talk about that topic, just to reference before where you had this tweet where you were talking about the politics of people getting tryouts and getting recruited to Overwatch League teams. Most people thought when they saw the Overwatch League slots filling up with all these different squads that either Rogue would have a slot or the Rogue team would be playing for someone who has a slot. Mm-hmm. And basically, that's not going to happen. We found out. It was all said officially. Does this mean that, as far as we know at the time of this interview, like winz won't be an Overwatch League player in the first season or two?
That's most likely, yes.
Does that bother you?
Well, yes, just because I think after those 2 years and the achievements I have accomplished with my teams, like if anyone deserves to be in, that's the whole lineup. Well, the entire lineup. Like you can't be dominating that long, winning that many tournaments and not deserve to be in it. Like in that sense, yes, it does. I think we worked hard enough to actually justify being in it, no matter what. But you know, like.
So, okay, explain this to me, right? When I heard Overwatch League was announced, right, obviously we can't say too much about who's on the teams that hasn't been publicly announced because, I mean, literally some people aren't allowed to say that and some of it can change as well. But I actually thought it would end up like this. I thought what will happen is there'll be a few teams that go the route of like, right, get a whole Korean team. There'll be a few teams that make just their own brand new squad. And then there'll be a few that are like, right, we'll just pick up a whole squad. In theory, you would think the two teams that were a lock to get picked up as an entire squad was EnVyUs and Rogue. These are the two where it's obvious from the results and the players, you know, even if, say, an imaginary team, Team X doesn't want them. Okay, well, Team Y or Team Z, you know, another squad's going to want them, another Overwatch League slot. Without giving any details that you're not allowed to because they're private, what is the reason why the Rogue lineup wasn't just picked up entirely by one franchise after so much success?
It's I think money reasons really. I can't really get into the details because I'm not really allowed to, but like sure. It's money reasons, as in probably too expensive to buy for most of the franchises.
Ah, okay. Are you someone where I have a question for you that's more of an abstract topic about the way the game Overwatch is played. So one part that to me is really weird still, as someone who's kind of still an outsider, is every time I watch Overwatch, I almost have to remind myself in my brain, like, oh wait, what game mode is this again? Right, and what maps do they play in that? And then I have to then start thinking, right, fucking hell, is this team even good on that particular game mode? And then which maps would they want? And does this tournament even use a pick ban? And that's actually, as someone who's an esports veteran, that's actually very confusing every time I come and watch the game. Whereas every other game, the only game I'm aware of that has a similar concept is like Call of Duty, where they have different game modes they play within it. So that in itself is still weird to me to this day. What is your take on that? As it seems like that's what Blizzard's sticking with. They're going to just keep using it where you have to play all the game modes and you have this big map pool, and it's still up in the air as to what the map veto system will be, or if there'll be one. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? Like, should they streamline it? Should it only be one game mode or one or two game modes? Should it be a small amount of maps? Should it be a big amount of maps but only for those game modes? What's your sense for how you would like it to be done?
Personally, if I was to choose, I would probably just put one game mode, especially get rid of the 2CP one, because it's just random and rotten. Like, they try to fix it, but it still doesn't really work. It's still too hard to capture the second point. It's frustrating to play, honestly. I would probably get rid of the King of the Hill as well, just because it feels random. Like, the first fight has too much impact on whoever is going to win the round, especially with the Pharah Mercy composition mirror crap. So I would remove those two, and at the same time it would remove like half of the map, because right now we have to practice, like, if I'm not mistaken, like 13 maps, which is a lot. And if you have to spend time like going on a map and actually put strategies together, like, you can't really do that on 13 maps. That's just too many. So that's my personal opinion. I would remove probably the two mods, which is 2CP and King of the Hill, which would remove half of the map, which I think would be a good thing. So the teams can get better. I can focus on a fewer maps.
So it's more than 12 years since you won that ESWC back in Unreal Tournament. Mm-hmm. You're 30 years old. Like, if you think of the typical history of esports, that's pretty old. There's very few players were still pro players at that age. Right? Most people from the outside should think, right, well, if you're not going to be in Overwatch Season 1, your team's broken up and you were already kind of sacrificing and playing Lucio for the team as it was, you've been around a long time. Is this the end for winz? Are you going to stick around? Are you going to try and somehow keep going in Overwatch? What's your mentality at the moment?
Well, I'm just waiting to see what kind of offers I get, and then I will decide from that. Like, there is a chance I might just go back to playing poker for a bit, and then decide, because I'm kind of... Are
you very motivated to be an Overwatch player if the opportunity was there?
If the opportunity was there, yes, because I think in the long run, that's the right choice in terms like money, and even if I want to be happy, I think that's going to be better than poker. But yes, it's all going to depend on what kind of offers I get.
Okay. Are there, in your opinion, in Overwatch, at least with Western teams, is there a lack of players who have your mentality?
Is there what, sorry?
A lack of players with your mentality to the game, of how you think about the game, how you play the game?
I would say so, yes. And I don't think like most of the pro players actually realize what it takes to actually win a tournament. Well, maybe it's only my thing. Like, I need to play. If I want to be confident, I don't do it now just because I have to play Lucio, and Lucio, like, it doesn't really matter all that much. Sure. So I don't play 12 hours a day, but like, I think most of the players don't realize if you want to perform like at 100% on a D-Day, then you need to play 12 hours a day just for the confidence. Like, you need to be confident in your own game. And I don't think, like, okay, people are stupid. it's like people in general are stupid, and I think most of the players are not smart enough to figure out how to play the game exactly. And you can still see it in the way teams play nowadays, even though like we've shown the path as a rogue. Might sound cocky, but I think that's the way I feel about it. So if they're like, yes, probably. I think any team would be lucky to pick me up as a coach. But I'm not much into that. I still want to be a player for now, if I can.
To tie what you're saying here into that earlier answer you gave, where you said about the reason people sort of downplayed your success is because they were like, you were just AFK on the payload, basically, and you said that you thought a lot of players didn't actually understand how the game was played, right? Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, you know, Overwatch is still a pretty young game. It's only had a competitive scene for like almost 2 years, and even then, maybe not even quite 2 years. And I have to say, thinking of other esports games, like, it's especially noticeable in, like, MOBA games. If I was to go back now from 2017 to the beginning of, like, Dota 2 or League of Legends, I could just tell some of those pro players now, like, small things about the game, like how minion waves work and concepts of what you can do in the jungle, that would blow their minds and would actually, like, make some of them, in theory, be able to win the tournament that they could never win otherwise. Is Overwatch like that? Does it actually have a lot of depth? Because it sounds like you're saying, like, Rogue figured things out that the other teams still haven't figured out.
But I just feel like just the way they play, I don't think they value that much like positioning advantage, even though it means you're gonna fight outnumbered for the most part. They're still playing like very passive on the payload, and I don't think that's the way.
Okay.
Simple as that.
And how did you come to these conclusions then on your philosophy to play the game? Are you studying it a lot? Do you think about it a lot? Is it just from playing scrims? How have you come to your way of thinking?
No, I just think a lot outside the game, and you realize you're more likely to win a fight if you have the position advantage, even though you are. Well, you're more likely to win the fight regardless of the ultimates. But even like, if you are at the ultimate disadvantage, then it's pretty much your only shot. You need to surprise the team. Like, we've been doing something in Rogue, mostly on King of the Hill, where we know we won't win the next fight just because of the ultimates. Mostly they'll have like 4 or 5 ultimates. We didn't use anything. We used that many in order to win the fight. The only way we're going to win the fight is to take them by surprise and just do a surprise attack from whichever angle. And I haven't seen any team do that yet. Like, they can't think that far yet. It's the same for let's fight as 5 on the choke point with the positioning advantage, and have just a Lucio to push the payload and whatever. You're more likely to win the fight. Like, I haven't seen that many teams do that yet. Like, I don't know, like, what are we thinking? We had been the most dominant team, I think, mostly because of those, and because we were that individually skilled. But like, it's all things put together, and like, I don't see any team doing what we have been doing.
So who in Rogue are the people who are thinking these things up then? Is it just you, and then you relay it to the rest of the team? Is there a couple of you who get together?
It's I think there's only like 2 or 3 of us actually coming up with things strategically. Like, I don't want to sound cocky or anything, but I think I've come up with most of the stuff. Like that thing with the payload where it's best to just have one on the payload and force the fight far away from the payload. That's 5 with the positioning advantage. And the choke point, use the choke point as a force. It's best to have just one. It's best to have the payload move with one guy and take the fight away from the payload, so the payload never stops, instead of just staying grouped on the payload and take the fight on the payload, where the payload is going to stop for 20 seconds and people can't do the math. Like, that's the kind of things I came up with. But it's not only me in the team. Like, it's I think it's fair to say that it's a lot of me, but the others have their say as well, of course.
Okay. When that move happened, that was the split between Misfits and between Rogue, and the nationalities went to each other's home area, as it were, right? Even though, as we've discussed, essentially the Swedish players initiated that move. It's not like you guys were like, we've got to only have French players. You know, it was a different setup as to what happened. But
I was actually against going full French, just because I think whenever people are speaking the native language, they go way overboard on the comms. Like they come too much. They want to be too precise or whatever, and they also start talking about some stuff like joking and stuff, like when they're more comfortable. Like I think it was a natural filter to be forced to speak in English, and the comms were actually more concise, more to the point. Okay. So they were more clean. So I would say personally, I did prefer having the comm in English just because of that natural filter. So yeah, I was actually going against even a fourth French. When we were 3 French, 3 Swedes at the beginning, I was against going a 4th French just because I knew it would like tip the balance, and then people would talk more French, and then we would get like apart a bit.
Because this is something I want to ask about, because actually in Counter-Strike, which is obviously my main game, in that game, the French players are famously very resistant to playing with anyone who isn't French, and they definitely don't want to speak English only. Like the closest they'll come is obviously they'll play with Belgians who speak French. That's it. That's about as international as it gets. But it sounds like that's not an issue for you. So if it hadn't have been that you'd end up with this lineup, you would have had no issue bringing in like a German guy or an American guy or whoever it might be?
Yeah.
Does it not matter in Overwatch?
Like the only reason some of the players in our team wanted to go full French is because they are not comfortable in English.
Right.
That's pretty much it. There's not more to it. But I like for the game itself, I don't think it really matters because you should have a strategy beforehand. You should have like calls that you know you're gonna make. Like it's on Counter-Strike, for example, like every position has an English name. You don't like. I'm sure even in French they call the position in English.
Yes. They have a lot of the similar names. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't really see what's the problem with having a mixed team.
Okay then, so does it go this far then? Would you have been fine with having a Korean player? Like if Effect could have joined Rogue for some reason, you'd have been okay with something like that?
As long as they can speak a bit of English, yes, I would have been fine with it. But I don't think the Koreans are good enough in English yet.
Right, okay. What if someone, okay, obviously Rogue Overwatch, this particular lineup is RIP, gone too soon. It's not going to be together in the Overwatch League. So if people wanted to go back and reminisce on the best times, is there like a tournament or a match you could pick out that this was Rogue at its best? I
would have to say probably the final of APAC.
Okay.
Against Lunatic-Hai.
So Rogue was at its best when it had the Swedes?
Yeah.
How come?
Well, we haven't really won any LAN besides the takeover LAN as a full French lineup.
Sure.
So, and we won 2 big ones with the Swede, the half Swede, half French one. So, like, it's hard to like say, yeah, that online tournament is the one I think we were the best at. No, I don't really value an tournament all that much. I think what matters are LANs. So I would put that on, our victory against Lunatic-Hai for 1 in the final. Very convincingly.
At the end of this interview, do you have a final message for the people who watched it, or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Oh boy, I would need to think to put that into words, and I don't want to be rude, so it's like I've been reported too many shit stuff about me on Reddit and whatever. I don't even want to address it. I'm trying to ignore it for the most part.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Why do you think that people misunderstand you or paint you in a different light to how you see yourself? What do you think the disconnect is? What aren't they getting?
I think it's, well, first of all, I'm playing Lucio, which you're never going to be the impact player, and I think Teemu was like a part of it because he did some stream that I was carried and garbage, and like people are stupid as we stated, and they're chips. So I think it's like just those two put together, really.
Okay. So do you have anyone you want to thank then, or say hello to?
No, well, thank you for the interview.
Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup indeed.
Hey guys, it's Dreamforce here. You know they say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a Kiran? Well, this is Foreign's channel. And every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Foreign kills a Seagull.